All right, I want to welcome everybody back. This is going to be part two. The other part one was 70 minutes, and I feel that's enough for us to try to load and download, and try to view from home over our Wi-Fi. I don't really want to get much longer than that. All right, so now we're going to begin part two. I'm just going to do a little racing. In part one, we've been looking at what alcohol is and how it gets made by fermentation. Then we began looking at the pharmacokinetics of it. And then we began looking at its effects on different body systems, from the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, the pancreas, and so on. And now we're beginning to take a look at its effects on the cardiovascular system, right? The heart, the blood, and the blood vessels. And it has quite a bit of an effect on this system. All right, so one effect that it can have on the heart is, just like it weakened the muscle of the sphincter at the esophagus, which led to reflux, there's a theme here. It also weakens the muscle of the heart. And so it can lead to what we call cardiomyopathy. Myo refers to muscle. Pathy or pathos always refers to disease. Cardio is talking about your heart. So they're saying that alcohol itself can cause this disease called cardiomyopathy. And what it is weakened heart muscle. Now remember, your heart needs muscle to pump the blood all around your body. So if you have a weakened heart muscle, that's not good. Heart attacks, for example, weaken your heart muscle. And so we wouldn't really want to do anything that weakens your heart muscle. Now, some people, again, it can be a temporary thing, just from one-time drinking. And sometimes when people aren't accustomed to the alcohol, and during one of the drinking holidays that come up, and suddenly they don't drink at all, and suddenly they go drink a whole bunch of beers on a summer day or in the middle of New Year's Eve, and they drink a whole bunch of alcohol, they can sometimes get cardiomyopathy. And what's going to happen is they start to experience like irregular heartbeats. They might feel chest pain. And when that happens, right, they have to go to the emergency room. And the emergency room has to rule out, first of all, if someone's having regular heartbeats and chest pain, we want to make sure that you're not having a myocardial infarction, or an MI, or myo is muscle again, cardio is heart. That's a heart attack. So the first thing, you're going to get to the hospital, they're going to have to rule out that you're having a heart attack. And it takes about 24 hours to rule that out. So you're going to be in the hospital. And meanwhile, your blood alcohol level will come down. And hopefully, if you're not having a heart attack, like you're a young, healthy person and you're not having a heart attack, once your blood alcohol level returns to normal, the chest pain and the weakness goes away. Right? So when the blood alcohol level goes back down to normal, which in the human is 0, right, then the muscle function returns. Right? Sometimes this is referred to as holiday heart syndrome. Because a lot of people will have this condition during the drinking holidays. Because again, the drinking holidays, alcohol brings it on. So we're thinking New Year's Eve, Cinco de Mayo, St. Patrick's Day, 4th of July, and so on, right? Super Bowl, right? Holidays where people tend to overconsume alcoholic beverages. Mardi Gras. And so that's one thing. Okay, I'm going to swipe this clean. No, I'm not going to swipe it. I think I'll erase it. Right? So one condition you can get is something called cardiomyopathy. Now, I mentioned sometimes when people have this cardiomyopathy, they might get an irregular beat, right? Their heart isn't beating, 72 beats a minute. Boom, boom, boom. Maybe it goes boop, 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 boop. They skipping beats, right? Getting too close together, then long pauses. We call that an arrhythmia, right? When someone gets an irregular heart rhythm. And alcohol can help produce irregular heart rhythms. And one thing that is interesting as we get into with alcohol, as we begin to talk about benefits of alcohol, one thing that they've noticed is this idea of something that we call the French paradox, because it was originally seen in France. The French are known to drink a lot of wine, and we know that alcohol is causing a lot of heart injury, right? This cardiomyopathy is heart injury. So you go, well, how can the French drink so much wine? And the French they drink a lot of wine, and yet paradoxically, opposite of what you'd expect to happen, that's what a paradox is, they have low heart disease. And so people were trying to study them. They'd say, well, they walk a lot more than Americans. That's true. But they also cook with a lot more greasy foods and a lot more heavy creams, and they tend to overeat like their calorie intake, right? So there must be something going on. We know too many calories is not good for your heart either. And one of the things that we discovered about alcohol, and this is actually a benefit, even though I haven't really gotten into benefits yet, is that alcohol, we have two types of cholesterol in our body. And cholesterol is a really important part of our cell membranes, if you remember, keeping it fluid. And in our cells' bloodstream, though, we have two types of cholesterol that's floating free in our blood, what we call the HDLs and the LDLs. Stands for high density lipoprotein and low density lipoprotein. Name's not important. But the HDLs, those are what we call the healthy cholesterol, and the LDLs are what we call the bad cholesterol. And Dr. Oz, I don't necessarily go for TV doctors, but his way of remembering it, he says that the H, just remember that, it's the healthy one. And that the L is the lousy one, right? So the one you want is the H. You want the healthy one. You want to have as much of this HDL. As it turns out, the more HDLs that you can have in your bloodstream, the more heart protective it is. We say that these HDLs are heart protective. They protect your heart against things like a heart attack. And the more HDLs you have in your bloodstream, the more heart protection you have. And as it turns out, a moderate amount of alcohol, which equates to 1 serving per day, 1 to 2 servings per day if you're a man, and a half to 1 serving per day if you're a female. And by the way, a serving is not the same thing as a drink. So we're talking a 1 1/4 ounce shot of liquor. We're talking 3 to 4 ounces of wine. And we're talking 6 ounces of like 4.5% beer. So if you're drinking stronger European beer, you should be at the 3 ounces. Most beers come like 8 or 12 ounces in a can. So you're already drinking 2 servings in a can. So we're talking not very much alcohol. So very, very low amounts of alcohol, what they call moderate amounts of alcohol, moderate amounts of alcohol will actually raise up your healthy HDLs. Right? Excessive amounts do not have that effect, and then all the negative effects that we're going to continue to talk about will continue to happen, right? And some people can't drink alcohol for a lot of reasons, medications, family history of alcoholism, maybe they're an alcoholic themselves. And studies have been done. I couldn't find a container. Imagine this said grape, because this would be grape juice. And what you're looking for is if you want to have the same protection, if you want to get the same HDL protection, but none of the negative effects of alcohol, we'll see like its cancer effects and whatnot. So if you want to get all the benefit and none of the risks, if you have 1 serving of unfiltered grape juice, which is what we make wine from, it'll have the same effect. And I want to show you that this is apple juice, but the unfiltered is like, the filtered is clear. If you can see through the container with the grape juice, it's also like the wrong kind, right? You don't want the clear type. What you want is it to be cloudy. And again, even though this is an apple juice, I found a grape juice one, but the picture didn't, grape is so dark, it was hard to show in a picture that one is sort of see-through and the other is not, right? You want the unfiltered, you want the cloudy juice. If you start drinking more than a serving of that, you're going to raise your risk of gaining weight and getting fat, because sugar, it's a lot of sugar in grape juice. But we're talking like literally you can have like a 1 1/4 ounce shot of that and have all the benefits where it's going to help raise up your HDLs and none of the negatives. Okay, cancer. All right, so alcohol produces a lot of cancer. It produces cancer directly. Sorry. I'm trying to get my stylus, and instead I'm hitting the other button. There you go, stylus. It causes a lot of injury, directly injuring cells, because alcohol is so membrane permeable, right, that it's able to go through the cell membrane. It's able to go through the phospholipid bilayer and the second phospholipid bilayer of your nucleus, and it's able to enter your nucleus quite easily, right? It's able to go pretty much just straight in. And remember, what's located in your nucleus is some important stuff that needs protecting, right? Your DNA. And I want to talk about DNA and cancer and something at a moment. So your DNA, the only thing that your DNA codes for is it's the directions for how to make proteins. And for every protein that your cell needs to make, you have to have one piece of DNA, or what we call like a gene. The gene are the complete directions for making a protein. If you want to make a different protein, right, you're going to have a different gene. And if you want to make a third protein, right, you're going to have a third gene, because one gene makes one protein. One gene tells the directions for making one protein, right? If you want to make a different protein, you're going to need a different gene, right? And so those directions are coded for in our DNA. Anything that changes the directions, right? So our DNA is a code, right? It's a coded set of directions. Anything that changes the directions or changes the code is what we call a mutation. Some mutations are good. It's what leads to evolution. Some mutations are not good and not bad. They just lead to interesting things like different eye color or different hair color. Some mutations are bad and they lead to diseases like cystic fibrosis or maybe cancer. Okay. Only thing the DNA codes for is how to make proteins. Anytime those DNA directions get distorted or changed, they become mutated. They're no longer, if those directions don't work right, then you're not going to be able to make that protein. If you needed that protein for a particular cell function, like maybe this was the protein that you need to make melanin, right? That's that brown pigment in our skin. If that gene got corrupted, then you can't make this protein. If you needed this protein to make melanin, now you can't make melanin, right? That's a disease, like someone who suffers from albinism, right? An albino. The gene that they needed, the DNA directions that they needed for making the protein that you needed to make melanin was mutated. Therefore, they couldn't make that protein, so they can't make melanin, and now they're an albino, right? They have a disease. Any molecule or any substance, could be like ultraviolet light, right? Any molecule or any substance that can cause DNA mutations. So anything that can cause DNA mutations, we call a mutagen, where that's short for mutation generator, right? To generate. So any chemical that causes DNA mutations, any chemical that causes DNA mutations, or it doesn't have to even be a chemical, right? It could be radiation, ultraviolet radiation. So any substance, maybe the better word, anything, is called a mutagen. If you cause a mutation, and that mutation leads to something that we call cancer, we can say that mutagen more specifically is what we call a carcinogen. A carcinogen is a substance that causes mutations that cause cancer. Something that causes mutations that lead to cancer. So carcinogens lead to cancer. Okay. When we say the word mutagen, we don't know, it's just general. Mutagen, maybe some mutagens cause cancer, some mutagens don't cause cancer. Some mutagens have another special name. They're not called a carcinogen. Instead, they're called a teratogen. And teratogens are molecules or substances, right, that cause mutation. And those mutations lead to birth differences. Changes in the developing offspring, right? The changes in the way their heart develops or the way their brain develops, right? So that they're born with a difference at birth, that their heart's not going to work the same anymore, right? They're going to lead to some sort of birth difference. Some birth differences can be quite severe and might cause the baby to die, right? Not be able to thrive, right? If it injures their brain to the point where the brain can't function, right? That baby's not going to be alive, or it injures their heart, right? The Zika virus is a teratogen, right? And it injures the nervous system, right? And it's a teratogen, and it causes those babies to be born with really small heads, right? So lots of things are mutagens. A special mutagen that causes cancer is called a carcinogen. A mutagen that can cause birth differences is called teratogens. And the reason we're using these words is I want to be clear in a moment now. Alcohol is a mutagen. Alcohol is a carcinogen. It absolutely causes an increase in risk of cancer, every single type of cancer. Raises your risk of cancer, everything it comes into contact with, mouth, esophagus, stomach, large intestines, small intestines, rectum, anal cancer, right? It also causes an increase in cancer of the pancreas. It causes an increase in cancer of the liver. It causes an increase in skin cancer, an increase in prostate cancer, an increase in ovarian cancer, right? Because it is a carcinogen, and also because it can go through membranes so easily that it can let other molecules that are carcinogens in as well as they come in on its tailwinds as it goes through the membrane quickly. And alcohol is also a teratogen, and it leads to birth, some severe differences in birth developmental changes in developing offspring, right? It leads to physical developmental changes in our offspring, in our babies. So, and that's what we're going to talk about next. So, effects on the reproductive system. So, on the adult reproductive system, a lot of people drink alcohol because they think it'll make them better in the bedroom. And maybe it does reduce some of we haven't talked about its brain effects yet, but maybe it does give them a little bit of false sense of confidence and make them able to approach somebody and be able to meet somebody to be able to do the act. But when it comes to actual procreation, alcohol has a pretty bad effect on the male and female in terms of the actual sex act. Right? For a man to be able to have sex, ultimately reproduce, he needs to be able to have an erection and be able to maintain that erection long enough to impregnate a female. And when it comes to the erection, alcohol causes erectile dysfunction. Which means it's hard for them to get and maintain an erection. And that would not make it difficult just to have sex, but also to be able to reproduce. And when we look at a female and we look at the sex act, she actually has a harder time, a longer time to reach climax, to the point that that longer time might be never. Right, so she's thinking she's going to get to climax and just gets there, doesn't get there, doesn't quite get there. Right, so you've got a man that's having trouble keeping and maintaining an erection. You got a female that's having trouble getting to climax. The two of them together are not exactly winning when it comes to alcohol on their reproductive system. Again, when we look at cancer, it's going to have effect there. It increases the risk of prostate cancer and ovarian cancer and cervical cancer. And only men have prostates, and only women have ovaries and cervixes. But basically, it's raising the risk of cancer in all of these. Okay, when we go to look at the reproductive system again, now we've looked at the adult, and now we should be beginning to look at the developing offspring. And we've seen in the adult how it can affect our ability to have sex and things like that. But also in our developing offspring, right, it can lead to developmental changes, so that the brain or the body or that baby doesn't develop in a typical way, and it develops in an atypical way, what somebody might cause a birth defect or just birth differences. And those birth differences might cause heart defects or brain injuries and things like that. And alcohol absolutely causes developmental changes and birth defects. And while we're talking about this in cancer, I'm going to make sure I covered this correctly. So, again, DNA, the only thing it codes for are the directions for how to build a protein. And how to build each protein is, the directions are contained in a gene. So if I want to build this protein, number one, I'm going to have a gene for it. If I want to build a different protein, I'm going to need a different gene, say gene 2. Gene 2 can build protein 2, and so on, right? And if I don't have the gene, I can't make that product, right? So if this gene were to be injured or I don't get it, then I can't make the product. Such as if this gene were to be injured and this was an enzyme that I needed to make melanin, and if I don't have this protein because I don't have the gene, then I can't make melanin. And now I have a disease where I have albinism, or I am an albino, right? Where I cannot make the brown pigment that we associated with human pigment. right? And again, these molecules, any molecule that can injure, any molecule that gets in and injures and can alter the code, anything that can alter the genetic code, we call a mutagen. If it can alter the code and that altered mutation leads to a particular thing that we call cancer, we can say that it is a carcinogen. Let me spell that better. Cancer generator, carcinogen, right? So some mutagens, right, they lead to changes, and those changes are mutations. Some mutations lead to changes that cause cancer. So a mutagen that causes cancer is a carcinogen. Some, right, alter the code, right? So carcinogens cause mutations that lead to cancer. And then there's teratogens that lead to mutations that cause birth injuries, birth developmental injury, right, to our offspring, right, so that we're born with some sort of defect, right, something didn't develop where it should have. So now, take a look at the fetal alcohol syndrome, right? Fetal alcohol syndrome is the most severe type of injury that's caused by the mom consuming alcohol at any time during the pregnancy. There is absolutely no safe time to consume alcohol, and there's absolutely no safe amount that is safe, no safe time, no safe amount where you can consume alcohol. And we can't study it. It would be unethical. You could have to take 100 women, divide them into groups, feed them different amounts of alcohol, and then wait to see which babies turn out defective, right? Unethical. However, if a baby dies from a car accident or something, and we get their brain on autopsy, we can then study them. So, for example, what we see in this picture here, these are actually 6-week-old babies that both died from accidents. And the baby on the right has fetal alcohol syndrome. And the baby on the left, right, this is the normal, typical brain. Normal, whatever that means, but typical. Right, and then the brain on the right, that's the one that's been injured by fetal alcohol syndrome. And you should notice a lot of things, right? All the lumps and bumps, the brain should have lots of those gyri and sulci, right? Giving it lots of surface area. And when you go to look at the baby with the fetal alcohol syndrome, he only has just a few lumps and bumps. Some areas like this is just completely smooth. Right, just nothing there, where it should be a whole bunch of tangles. Right, so it has less brain in volume, it has less cortex on the outside, right, the cerebrum, where you do your higher order thinking, right? If you can't do higher order thinking, you're going to have trouble controlling yourself, right? You're going to have trouble learning, right, and consequences for your actions and all those sorts of things. So children that are born with fetal alcohol syndrome, right, they're going to have some serious injuries to their brain. And they're also going to have serious injuries that you're going to about to see on the outside of their body. And this is the most severe of the injuries that alcohol can cause to our offspring. The other one is the alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder. Both of these conditions lead to problems where kids have trouble with cause and effect. They It can't learn cause and effect. That's how we learn, quite honestly, how to fit into the world and how to learn in general. When I steal, I get in trouble, I lose privileges. Therefore, I've learned I won't steal, cause and effect. If you can't do that, you're going to end up as a sociopath, and you're going to end up in prison, or you're going to need to be in some sort of sheltered existence. And this is true for both the fetal alcohol syndrome and ARND, right? Both of these conditions they're having trouble with learning, right? And the FAS is the more severe of these two conditions, where we're going to see outside things, but ARND will also be causing problems. Okay, and again, here's that brain, and here's the brain of a child with fetal alcohol syndrome, and here's the normal brain. And then when you look at fetal alcohol syndrome, when we look on the outside, I need to pause for a moment. The video is not caught up. There we go. Right, and here's with fetal alcohol syndrome. What's going on in the brain is representative of what's going on the outside. So when you look at someone's face, the moment that their ears are forming is exactly the same moment that their brain is forming, and their face. And so on the left is what you typical baby face. And if you look at it, there's some features missing from a baby that's been born with fetal alcohol syndrome. One thing you look at is the red part of their lip, right? The border of it, what they call the vermilion. And when you look at their upper lip is very, very thin. There should be a lot of vermilion there, but it's not. Instead, it's thin, right? And it's when that part of those cells were developing, it should have made both the upper and lower lip. Instead, it made a very thin upper lip. And also, they usually have a very small chin, which often you won't see until they grow up, but they have a very short chin. Then you look at the same place above the lip. It's not just that the vermilion border is thin, it's just that the whole lip actually lacks contour. There's normally like these dimples that you see like on this kid on this side, what we call the philtrum, right, where there's like a little dimple. And that dimple is usually absent in children that have the fetal alcohol syndrome. Also, the openings to their eyes are a little bit different. There's a little bit narrowed so that there's a little bit of a fold, kind of, maybe I can do it in white. A little bit of a fold sort of drifting over the edge of their eye, right, where it looks like it's sort of caught in the eye socket. As well as they usually have a very short nose, and this part is very, very flat, and they usually have a very short turned up nose. Right? And all of these things are evidence that inside their brain, the ears as well will usually be set a little bit low, or the edges of them will be a little bit irregular, right? And when all these facial changes are taking place, that's also the same time these brain changes are taking place. So we see facial differences. Right? So it's not just that we're going to see the brain injuries, we're also going to see the facial differences, and it's also going to be developmental differences, right, with behavior, etc. When we see the ARND, we don't normally see, they have brain changes, but with ARND, we don't usually see these facial changes, right? So not typical with ARND. And again, there's no safe amount and there's no safe time. Right? There's no safe amount and there's no safe time to consume alcohol during pregnancy, because it is a poison, it is a teratogen, it is a mutagen, and we don't want it to injure the developing offspring. And again, it would be unethical to do a test. We'd have to give pregnant women varying amounts of alcohol until we destroyed the offspring to determine what would be the correct level of alcohol, right? So we don't do those studies. Okay, so we were looked at the sexual effects on brain, on the developing baby, right? But there's also physiologic effects on the already developed brain, right? What we call the right? So in the adult brain. So as people begin consuming alcohol, they can develop what's called Wernicke syndrome and Korsakoff syndrome. And that's actually typo. Korsakoff. And Korsakoff syndrome and Wernicke syndrome are actually brain injury. And Wernicke syndrome is where the cerebellum is injured. Remember, that's maintaining most of the motor skills and motor function. And what happens is, remember when people are drunk, they stumble, they have slurred speech, right? That's because the alcohol is, while they're drunk, the alcohol is going in, it's affecting their cerebellum, so they're going to have trouble walking. What we call ataxia. They're going to have slurred speech, right? All those things you associate with a drunk person. Well, normally someone drinks, hopefully they get sober up and the alcohol leaves their system and the brain goes back to normal. What happens with Wernicke syndrome is it becomes a permanent change to the brain. So now when they're sober and there's actually 0% alcohol in them, they still will appear to be drunk. They're still going to have trouble walking, trouble moving their muscles, trouble using their speech, right? They're going to have like a permanent state of slurred speech, but no alcohol. The other condition is called Korsakoff syndrome, and Korsakoff syndrome causes a problem with the cerebrum. Remember, that does a lot to do with thinking and memory. The diencephalon, a lot to do with memory, right? Cerebrum, remember, it's doing all of our higher ordered thinking, planning. What happens with the Korsakoff syndrome is their memory has a problem. And what happens is they have no new long-term memory. They can remember the past. They can remember the present. So as long as you're in the room with them, they'll remember who you are. The moment you step out of the room and come back, they're not going to know who you are, and you're going to have to reintroduce yourself over again. Because to remember that would require long-term memory, and they no longer will have long-term memory. Their cerebrum and their diencephalon have been injured to the point that it can no longer form new memory. And again, this is called Korsakoff syndrome. If they stop alcohol, sometimes the injury is not so severe, it can reverse. Once it's severe enough, it becomes permanent. And they're left with, you can have Wernicke by itself, you can have Korsakoff by itself, and generally you can all have both together, Wernicke and Korsakoff syndrome. Again, here's a little slide. And I've got a little video that I want to show you guys. It is about this young man, Brian Jennings, and he suffers from both Korsakoff syndrome and Wernicke's, and he thinks he's still a junior or senior in college, getting ready to graduate, needs to take some internships, but in reality, he's been living with he's a recovering alcoholic, and he's been living with Wernicke and Korsakoff syndrome, and he has trouble walking and drawing and writing and remembering anything. And he hasn't been to school in about 10 years. And that's the video I'm going to show you next if I'm able to get it to play.
February of 2009 with the onset in 2004.
All right, if this video plays, this is going to show this young man, and we're going to run through it, and then I'll explain to you afterwards what's going on. And again, he has both Wernicke and Korsakoff syndrome.
Hi, nice to meet you. This is a case study of Brian Jennings, a 35-year-old Korsakoff patient due to excessive alcohol abuse at an early age. He was diagnosed What's your name?
Brad Jennings.
Where are you right now?
I'm in an office. I'm guessing your office. It's nice. You got a lot of books.
What year is it?
It's 1997. Why?
Just asking. How old are you?
I'm 22.
What's going on in your life right now?
Well, I'm on break. Just got back to my mom's place. It's good. I haven't seen her in a while, so it's good. But I'm a senior. I'm just finishing up at Loyola, so I have a semester to go still in the spring. But I don't know. I guess I got to start looking into getting some internships, maybe something like that.
Ken, can you please look at this ID and tell me if that's a picture of you? Is that your ID?
Yeah, that's me.
What year is that ID issued?
Well, it says 10/12/10. That can't. I remember going, and this lady at the DMV was just an idiot. I mean, everybody, I get sent back in the line and back in the other line, and I don't know. I'm sure they just made some kind of mistake. That's weird, though. Definitely. 10/12/10. I don't know. I wouldn't worry too much about it. I'll get it fixed. Just a minute time.
Brad, can you please copy the figures on the page for me, and I will be right back.
These here?
Yep.
Yeah, I guess.
Hi, Brad. How are you?
Good. You?
Good. Do you know who I am?
No. You look like, I don't know, you must be a doctor. I don't feel sick.
My name's Dr. Pop. I have a quick question for you. Do you know who drew these pictures?
No. But whoever did isn't really very good at drawing sailboats. I don't know. It's weird. Why are these here?
Someone must have left them there. Hi, Dr. Pop. How are you doing today? Good. How are you doing? Doing all right. I'm pretty good. How is your support group going? It's going really well. I didn't think that I was going to like it at all at first, just because I thought it was kind of weird. But after we got your recommendation, I went a couple times, and it's just really helpful to have that kind of constant connection with other people who know what it's like to have someone in their family with this disease. And it's hard, and it's good just to have that kind of relatability to other people who understand exactly what I'm going through. So I've really liked it so far. Good. How do you think Brian is doing? Brian's doing pretty good. He hasn't been really doing so well with his amnesia and all that. He's still been, but his ataxia is getting better, which has been really helpful and really good to see. Good. Do you think that any treatments are helping him? I think they are, just with his ataxia for sure. Like, he's definitely gotten better a lot. So.
I just want to advance this if it's going to let me to another section.
Oh, yeah.
Here's the sister, she's just,
Unfortunately, since we started treatment,
she's asking if things are going to get better.
aging body for this.
And then she asked, in a positive interest of time, she asked the doctor, so my brother, we went home to visit mom, and he was shocked at how old our mother's been, and he couldn't understand how our mom could be so old. And is this going to be a normal occurrence? Is he just going to be shocked that the family's aging? And will he be shocked when he looks in the mirror and sees a much older person, but he still thinks he's 21 or 22 years old? And the doctor's like, yeah, that's just going to be what happens. Okay. All right. I just wanted to, at the end, to show you that video with a young man. And when he saw the picture of the sailboat, right, that he had drawn, right, I want to make sure you understand that significance. Like, so someone had like a picture of a sailboat, and then he had drawn it, and she said, who drew that? And he says, I don't know. They're not very good at drawing sailboats, though, right? And that's because he doesn't have the memory to know that he has just done this, right? She left the room to have him draw. That was sort of to show you that the reason he has trouble copying and drawing, that's the Wernicke, right? That's the cerebellar damage, right? The fact that she left the room and then when she comes back, that he can't remember who she is. He's, oh, do you remember me? And he goes, no, you must be a doctor. You must work here. And that's because, again, he's got this Korsakoff syndrome and he can form no new long-term memories. Even just a few seconds later, he has trouble. And again, I wanted to introduce you to one other thing. They confronted him with his driver's license. And they mentioned this word, confabulation. When people have, some of you will maybe know people that will have brain injuries, let's say, or Alzheimer's disease or something like that. And I want you to understand what confabulation is. When a person who has a serious memory issue, when they don't actually remember something, but they don't know that they have a memory problem. So they don't remember something, they also don't remember that they have a memory problem. So what happens is they can't go, oh, I don't remember this because I have a memory problem, because they don't remember even that. So when they're faced with something they don't understand, they'll just try to explain it. Their brain will try to take experience based on what it can remember. So based on life experience, it'll try to explain what happened. And that explanation is called confabulation. And it's not actually lying because there's no intent on this person's part to actually lie. They actually believe it to be true. Their brain is creating this story, right? And they're confabulating. And he confabulated when they asked him about his ID. He thinks it's 1997. And he's like 22 years old. But actually it's 2010. And he's a lot older, right? And he doesn't know what's going on. Or whatever year it was, right? But the fact is, he thinks he's younger, and in fact, he's older. He thinks he's 22, when really he's 27, or whatever the thing is. And he's always going to think he's 22. When he's 50 years old, he's still going to think he's 22, right? And again, that's the problem with the Korsakoff syndrome, and the Wernicke syndrome is a problem damaged with the cerebellum. Now, when we go to look at alcohol, there are some possible benefits of alcohol. And again, the possible benefits of alcohol actually have to do with what I already discussed, which are the HDLs. And that is, if you're having just one serving of alcohol and no more, then you probably can raise your HDLs. And that can decrease your chance of having heart disease. Now, you have to weigh that against the risks of things like cancer and brain injury. So if you're somebody who has a strong family history of having dementia and Alzheimer's and brain injury and Parkinson's disease and whatnot as you age, alcohol may be not your friend. Or you have a strong family history of cancers, right? Alcohol might not be your friend because while it might raise your HDLs and make you have less heart disease, what's the good of having a good heart if you're going to die of some sort of cancer, right? And so we do look at the possible benefit of alcohol having to do with the HDLs. All right, now these next slides are going to talk about the effects on the brain and the effects on neurotransmitters. And it has an effect on all of these neurotransmitters. And some of these are excitatory neurotransmitters and some of these are inhibitory neurotransmitters, right? And GABA being an inhibitory neurotransmitter, and alcohol increases the effects of GABA. So it depresses the brain. And alcohol is such a great depressant, right, that alcohol was originally the first anesthetic used. But the problem is the level of anesthetic, the amount of alcohol that you need to provide someone to give them anesthesia, right, which is to reduce their pain so you can do surgery on them. That level is very, very, very close to the dose that can kill them. And that, I want to introduce another term to you. We talked about the half-life, how long it takes, how much time it takes for something to leave your body, half the time, how long it takes for half of it to leave. We also have what's called the LD50, and that's the lethal dose. And the 50 stands for 50%. And this is the amount of drug given to, if you have 100 people, and you give all those people the same amount of drug, it's that dose where 50% or half of them die. Right? So it's the dose that kills half the people that take it. And alcohol has a fairly low LD50, meaning it doesn't take that much alcohol before you start to die from alcohol poisoning. Right. So, unfortunately, the dose that makes an anesthetic dose was awfully close to the lethal dose. So, while it was a good anesthetic, half the patients died as a result of the anesthetic dose that you gave them. So it really wasn't a good anesthetic, and in modern times we do not use alcohol as an anesthetic. Okay, glutamate. Glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter, but alcohol opposes its effect. Alcohol inhibits this. You can think of glutamate like the gas pedal on a car. Right? It's normally excitatory, it makes the car move more. But alcohol would be like a rock placed behind the gas pedal so that the gas pedal can't depress and you can't get it to move. And GABA, right, is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, and alcohol makes GABA go up. So together, alcohol causes a lot of depression in the brain, right? It makes it very, very hard. These two things together, the effects of alcohol on both of these together, makes it harder for the brain to reach action potential. And a person may feel sleepy or relaxed. But if this happens in the brainstem, remember, your brainstem has to reach threshold, reach action potential to send signals to tell you to take a heartbeat or to take a breath. So if alcohol begins to build up in the brainstem, right, then the brainstem can't send those signals to your heart, and then your heart will stop contracting and you'll stop breathing and you're going to die. So these depressant effects of GABA and the fact that alcohol inhibits glutamate, a normally an excitatory neurotransmitter, and prevents it from working, is one of the reasons why alcohol has such a poor LD50, because if this happens to the neurons in the brainstem, right, you're going to die. Okay, serotonin. Alcohol causes an effect on serotonin. Serotonin is an excitatory neurotransmitter that's normally in our brain. When it's circulating in normal levels, it helps us to maintain, works especially with our mood. And one of the things that alcohol does is it actually lowers our levels of serotonin, and that actually creates a lowering our mood. A lot of people think of alcohol as like, oh, they're in a good mood, but for the wrong reason, right? So chronic consumption of alcohol can lead to things such as depression, right? Because if our mood is down, we can have depression. if my mood is really down, right, I'm a little bit sad, blues, gets worse, depression. If my depression gets bad enough and it's directed towards me, I might become suicidal, right? If it's directed outwards towards other people, I might feel like a lot of depression has to do with anger, right, and frustration, not just sadness, right? And if that anger gets directed inwards, you can be suicidal, and if it gets directed outwards, right, you can be homicidal, right? And that's directly because alcohol is affecting the neurotransmitter serotonin. So now we've seen it affects GABA, it affects glutamate, right, and it causes depression in the brain. And then it lowers your level of serotonin, and it literally causes depression, like we think of clinical depression. Not just the depression of the neurons themselves, but the actual state of being depressed. Okay, dopamine. Dopamine, also abbreviated all caps, DOPA. Very, very important excitatory neurotransmitter, but it's also very important when it comes to our mood. And this is why, even though it's lowering serotonin, the reason people feel good when they drink alcohol is its effect on this neurotransmitter. And alcohol actually increases the amount of dopamine available in the brain and in the part of your brain called the nucleus accumbens. And again, if you have your cerebrum, cerebellum, diencephalon, going down to the brainstem, the nucleus accumbens was this region here towards the front, and it's also called the reward center of the brain. And remember, your feelings and moods and emotions are being felt by the diencephalon. So what happens is when someone consumes alcohol, the dopamine levels go up. You get more and more dopamine, right, coming out of this region, and that creates what we call a change in mood, what we call euphoria. And the euphoric state is where you feel there's no pain. There's no mental pain, sadness, bad feelings, right? There's no physical pain. Again, why it's a good anesthetic. And in that moment, everything is just right with the world, right? And so we drink, and then we get this euphoric feeling. And now, ordinarily, again, this reward center is made to promote our good behavior, right? Through evolution, right? Whenever we did something that promotes our survival, right? You did something right. You went and got the food that you needed to survive, to feed your family, and then you eat it. And then as a result of eating it, now your nucleus accumbens sort of shoots off a bunch of dopamine. And that dopamine gives us euphoria, and now we feel good, right? And then it keeps us doing it again and again, and it promotes our survival. You study really, really, really hard for a test, and you worry about it. You don't know how the score was, and you get the score back, and you found out you did well, and you get a really, really good feeling in that moment. That's euphoria. It's short-lived, right? You have to go back out, and you have to do more good things to promote your survival to get another hit. The thing about alcohol is it's going to hijack this circuit. So someone drinks alcohol, and they've done nothing to promote their survival, maybe even shorten their life, but that reward center still shoots off a bunch of dopamine, and they still end up with euphoria. And to give you some numbers, a single serving of alcohol can raise the dopamine levels in your brain 100 times, 100-fold more than when someone finishes the sex act, right? So a single drink of alcohol completely more euphoric than sex in some people's brains. And again, why we talk about decrease in inhibition, why it would be a drug that somebody might take to meet people, right, is because if I go to a club and I want to meet friends, maybe get a boyfriend, girlfriend, right, I go to the club and I drink some alcohol, and while there's some negative effects, the short-term effect is euphoria. And in that euphoria, I have no pain, no mental pain, no physical pain. That means no doubts. So when I walk into that bar and I have that drink, suddenly everybody should want to get to know me. Why? Because I'm awesome. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm the best. You should want to get to know me. You should want to be my friend. You should want to date me because I'm in a euphoric state. And while my mind is thinking that, I have very low inhibitions. Like, I'm not worried about how you're going to judge me or how you're going to think about me because I don't have any worry. There is no worry. There is no doubt when you're in a state of euphoria, right? And so that's why we think of this drug as a drug that people might use to get things moving at a party. But in reality, right, we know that the GABA is causing depression. The GABA is causing depression. The glutamate effects are depression. The serotonin effects are depressing. That finally we have a reason why people drink alcohol, right? This dopamine, this euphoric effect, the lack of inhibition that they're going to experience. The final group of molecules I want to talk about neurotransmitter-wise are these things called endorphins. Endorphins are these molecules that are natural pain relievers in our body. And when someone consumes alcohol, it actually raises these levels of the endorphins in our body, circulating in our body and circulating in our brain, right? And so that also decreases the chance of pain and adds to the euphoria. All right, that in itself, I believe covers everything. There was one more thing that I wanted to cover, was a possible benefit of alcohol. I mentioned the HDL. Where it can rise up the good cholesterol, right, our healthy cholesterol. Another thing that we think it might do is it might decrease our risk of what we call coronary artery disease, or coronary artery disease. And coronary artery disease, or a narrowing of the blood vessels that serve the heart. You don't want the blood vessels serving your heart to be narrowed. You want them to be nice and big and open, right? So that the blood can easily flow through there and deliver nutrients to the heart. But if your blood vessels were to become narrowed, and now if that blood vessel is trying to deliver blood and there's only a little space for that blood to go, obviously that's going to be bad at delivering blood, right? And so it turns out that alcohol, again, when they're at the serving, 1 to 2 servings a day for a man, a half to 1 serving a day for a female. Or if you're a small male, you would be at the half to 1 female, or as we age, right? All of these would be negative problems. But as long as you stay at there and you're at the low enough dose, you might get the rise in HDL and you might get less narrowing, less coronary artery disease. One more thing that I want to talk about with the reproduction, and that had to do with on the babies and on children, and I just want to mention that here. There you go. One thing is, and this has to do with alcohol dehydrogenase, and this is how old you are when you start to make alcohol dehydrogenase, right? This is the enzyme that's going to break down alcohol, right, and convert it into acetaldehyde. And I want to talk a little bit about differences in age and sex and male and versus female, differences in this expression of this, the gene that we need to make this molecule that we need to then convert alcohol, metabolize alcohol into acetaldehyde. And here's the thing about this gene. Okay, so it's off completely until you're over 5 years of age. So if you expose a baby to alcohol and they're less than 5 years old, they cannot process it at all. And that means, right, they can die from small amounts of alcohol. And I want to point this out because there's some harm that gets done to children. They start teething, and somebody in the family says, oh, I can take care of that pain. Well, just put some alcohol in the baby's gums. And they put a little alcohol in the baby's gums, like a drop. And the baby goes to sleep. And they quiet down and they stop crying. Baby's not asleep. Baby's actually passed out drunk. And it's not funny because they could actually die from it. And also, we haven't talked much about addiction yet in this course, but one thing that we can say about addiction is the earliest of your first exposure to a drug, the more likely you are to become addicted to that drug. So if you give a small child alcohol, even if they don't die, right, and the pain goes away, you're now setting them up for later in life. They're more likely to be addicted to alcohol and less likely to be able to use alcohol in a regular way. And so that's a problem, right? Children under 5 don't make any, and really we don't start making a lot until we're well into our teen years, right? And that's why children are not supposed to drink alcohol. And certainly babies under the age of 5 are absolutely not supposed to be drinking alcohol. Now, that's babies. So, a couple things I wanted to say about this ADH. So, ADH starts being made after 5, but mostly not much until teen years. Right, so that means we can be harmed. Our LD50 for alcohol would be much lower until we're making the enzyme for breaking it down. Right, it's going to have a more lethal effect on us. Now, there's also a difference between males and females when it comes to the stomach. Right, so when we look at males and we look at females, there's a difference in distribution here. So let me show you this. So I don't like the way that looks, so let me wipe that clean. So let's say we have 2 stomachs here. So I have an esophagus traveling down, it's going into the stomach, right, and it's continuing on. And I've got 2 of these, so let me copy this one, copy, make an identical one, paste. Okay. And let's say this is a male and this is a female. There's differences between males and females in terms of our amount of alcohol dehydrogenase enzyme. And males have twice as much ADH in their stomach. Women have half as much ADH in their stomachs. And this is significant because we keep saying, oh, a man can have 1 to 2 drinks and be at the legal limit. A woman, a half to 2 drinks, half to 1 drink. Like, why is the difference? And that's because if a man and a woman both consume some alcohol, so you take the same amount of alcohol, and this guy drinks it, goes down, goes into his stomach. I take exactly the same serving of alcohol, and it goes down into the female stomach. What's going to happen is the enzyme is going to start metabolizing the alcohol, right? It hasn't even absorbed yet. It's breaking it down prior to absorption. And because men have twice as much enzyme, they're able to metabolize it twice as fast. That means there's less available to absorb. Women have half as much, so therefore less gets broken down. In the same amount of time, they're going to break down less. So while it's sitting in the stomach of a man, his stomach is breaking down that alcohol and destroying it. While it's sitting in the stomach of a female, at half the rate, she's breaking it down. So an hour later, she'll have broken less down. That means she has more available for absorption. oral route allows a higher percentage of absorption for females than males when it comes to alcohol. The oral route provides more alcohol to the female bloodstream than it does to the males, because men have more enzyme and they break it down at a faster rate. That means women will get drunk at a faster rate. That means women will suffer the complications and the death at a faster rate, the cancers at a faster rate, and all of that. Women are more susceptible to all of the injuries associated with alcohol for this very fact that we have less ADH in our stomachs compared to males. So males have a lot more. Also, it's also not fair when we get over to the liver. Because while everything starts absorbing and it starts going over to the liver on that first pass, women have smaller livers. So therefore, they also have fewer cells in their liver. So the man's liver makes more alcohol dehydrogenase. The woman's liver makes less. So she absorbs more from her stomach, and when it gets to the liver, her liver breaks down less, and her liver is going to pass more alcohol into her blood. More alcohol is going to get to her brain and her body fluids, right? So women are more affected by alcohol than by men. And I think that's what I have to say about that for now.